The Edge of Hollyfield. A short, scary story. Written by Stories from the Attic. Narrated by McConnell. Chapter 1. Hollyfield. This place felt, in Stacy Miller's words, like watching paint dry. It was sad enough that she was born here. Everything seemed like it was pulled out of some mundane book. A bore, she called it. To her, living here was just pure torture. She had had enough of the place. Hollyfield was a beautiful place. It had the usual look of a town with a mix of forestry and nondescript buildings. All the houses looked the same, cozy and average with the picket fences and gates, some with manicured lawns and gardens. It was the only place she had ever known. Unfortunately. Being the kind of person she was, isolated and self-absorbed, but with a curiosity that she couldn't stifle, she wanted nothing but to know more about the world outside her town. Where else would she go? Why would she go? Could she even go? Of course not. She was a 16-year-old brunette with eyes to match who lived with her quite odd parents. No siblings to entertain her. She lived like everything that was going to happen, happened. Of average height, modest stature, and with no care for any of that, Stacy kept modest time away for herself, with her house with no neighbors kind of home and dress me I don't care kind of wardrobe. Stacy barely had any close friends. Acquaintances, but nothing more. Stacy walked with a dark cloud over her thoughts. She did not hate her town. She just didn't know where to place her feelings about Hollyfield. Hollyfield. Did the two words have to be separated? One of the little things that bugged Stacy. Many things bugged her, influencing the moody delight she was. Ultimately weird, but a delight. Or so she thought. Stay in there for the entire holidays for all I care. I understand how you feel. Just bring out your laundry, Mrs. Miller said from behind Stacy's bedroom door. Mrs. Miller. There was something Stacy detested about her mother. It was like she never understood the solid and sacred meaning of privacy. There had been countless times that Stacy had made her feelings known to her mother, but she never seemed to understand, and sometimes her mother took it out of hand. Like now. I know you feel terrible about what happened, but you know you can't stay in forever. Stacy dashed off her bed and opened the door. I said for the last time, Mom. Stress leaked into her voice. Nothing happened that day. Would you just stop? Your laundry? Her arm outstretched. With a sigh, a hand on the door and the other reaching into the space near the entrance of her room, Stacy retrieved a small basket of clothes and thrust it into her mother's hands, slamming the door. Walking deeper into the shrine she termed her room, Stacy plopped on her bed and recalled the events that caused her mother to be as annoying as she was right now. Stacy considered Tristan Pierce, a teen in her class, as a too good-looking for his age kind of guy. She liked the way he was with people. Popular, of course. His attitude, his height, smile, everything about him Stacy liked. In her proud mind, she allowed herself to develop a liking that she had never had for any other person. She thought she could let him in her own little world. No one knew about her crush. Only her mother. The last person she needed to know about her feelings. But things had to go on, right? So Stacy was walking to the parking lot one Friday evening from school to wait for her father. But right behind the principal's car, against a nearby wall, Stacy saw the unmistakable physique of her crush. He could just be standing there alone, on his phone, with his earpieces in his ears, or with one of his friends. She could talk to him. Well, he wasn't alone or with one of his friends with earpieces stuck in his ears. He was well on his way to showing Amelia Kirst, the redhead in Stacy's class, just how good Stacy thought his lips were. Oh, baby! Mrs. Miller's voice was loud enough to be heard by the lovebirds, as well as Stacy herself. She was right there in her car with a dramatic, long face directed at her daughter. After the two other teens scuffled away, with a huff, Stacy hopped into the car and did not speak for the rest of the day. Chapter 2. The Two Arguing Men. That day did make Stacy unhappy like any normal teenage girl, but Stacy could not be that way for too long. She was Stacy Miller. She did not care too much about things like this. Stoic, reserved, silent and moody Stacy Miller. Hollyfield has never known such a citizen. By the side of the road with her hands behind her back, Stacy walked along the edge of town, thinking about what ground her nerves. Her mother and her annoying ways. The mind-numbing irritation she felt for Tristan Pierce, or what on earth she could do today apart from staying in her room all day with a mood as thick as rain clouds. She could hear rain somewhere far away. A low rumble of thunder sounded deep in the clouds above her, and the wind blew hard on the trees. Her footsteps were louder, and the grass whistled as the wind howled. Stacy looked up, and back down at her shoes. They were trainers, the softest pair she owned. She looked around. She had wandered quite a long way from her home. Now she was at the very edge of town that had very few houses. Houses that had been vacant for as long as she could remember. One of them had a broken mailbox and a rickety gate. Another wasn't even painted. A third had fallen into disrepair. Each house had a problem with it. No wonder the place looked almost abandoned. Wasn't she supposed to be at the park? Or the field behind her home? Stacy sighed. Sometimes she did not even know why she was the way she was. As she turned, she noticed two adult men talking to each other. Red-faced, they were talking loud, arguing even. The two men were standing in front of the worst-looking house, albeit a house that still seemed okay enough to live in. One of the men had his back to a closed door, arms folded as if he lived there, and the other stood in front of him. He was a tall and lanky man whose temper seemed larger still. His voice could barely be heard as he pointed fiercely at the man who looked emotionless at the door. Stacy wondered, how did she not notice them sooner? The shouting man's voice had increased several decibels now, and she could hear him quite clearly. But it could not leave Stacy's mind that she had been so carried away with thinking about nothing in particular that she had not noticed the two men who argued just a little way from her. She was standing right near the house watching the men. The two adults did not seem to notice her, too caught up in their anger. Stacy thought that they could not see her. So, Stacy, being just who she was, slowly backed away to hide behind a large bush. She was well hidden. After making sure she was as invisible as she made herself to be in school and everywhere else, she listened. "Why on earth would you do that to me? I stressed to get here in time to get that machine, but now you tell me this? I travelled 6 hours to get here. What do you mean I can't have it now? I will sue you for this. I swear you will regret it. I never should have trusted that immoral sight. Never should have trusted you." Stacy could hear the lanky man shout. From the corner of her eye, Stacy could see the curtains of a window in another house open. She turned her head away from the fighting and looked toward the window. She could see the pale white curtain parted at the corner, but she could not make out the face. Stacy, without a doubt, thought this place creepy. She would have left or run away as fast as she could from the arguing men and creepy surroundings. But what on earth would she do when she got to somewhere less creepy? With a defiant thought against going back to her boring home, a prisoner to her own thoughts, she bent even lower to hide herself more in the bush. She looked back to the shouting men, but now they were gone. Stacy frowned. How could they have gone? She looked back to the window, but now the curtain was closed. As Stacy stood back up in her usual irritation, she heard a strained grunt from the house that the two men had argued at just seconds before. With a frown, Stacy walked back home. Chapter 3. The Order. "What would you want to eat now? We have nothing else at home. I told you I couldn't go to the store today. We practically did nothing throughout today. We had enough time, Stacy said, slamming the door of the fridge. Baby, Mrs. Miller started again, visibly stressed. But Stacy was having none of it. She was mad at her mother this time. She never did anything during the day. She never even really took care of Dad. She paid too much attention to Stacy, and the person who truly needed help was Dad. He was extremely sick. Stacy seemed to grow angry with her mother more and more each day. And the worst thing, to Stacy, was her mother did not even think for once that she was wrong in some way. Darling, please, I have been feeling terrible all day. I don't think I am fine. Please, manage what we have right now. I promise I will get you something from the store when I can. Please, darling. You feel terrible? What? The person who has always felt terrible is Dad. You have never paid attention to him, Stacy said with shock, her eyes filling up with tears. Stacy. No, Mom. She looked back to her father. I'm so sorry, Dad, but I have to go. I've lost my appetite. Mrs. Miller watched her daughter go and let out a heavy sigh. With stinging eyes, she put her head on the kitchen table and cried. In Stacy's room, Stacy sat on her bed and opened her laptop. She had to check again. It had been too long now. She'd saved up enough and she knew it was time to get it. She got her internet connection going and typed into the search bar Craigslist.org. One of the two windows in her bedroom blew open with great force. It had gotten windy. Stacy immediately stood up and locked it. Her teeth chattered. The temperature had dropped too. She sat back in her seat and continued her search. She clicked on her country and state and moved on to the next category, the sales category. She moved to the search bar. Camera, she typed in. She clicked on lowest price and was directed immediately to a picture of an old yet neat camera. A hand was holding the contraption. It was a small hand. Its pale skin looked to hold the camera in a death grip, like the seller did not want to sell the device. She moved the mouse upwards and clicked reply. She did not even wait to read the description. After reading how ridiculously cheap the thing was, she sent a message to the seller. Good evening. I like your camera. It's at a good price. Is there anything I need to know about it? Stacy sighed and prepared to wait for a reply. But she did not have to. A reply had already come. Before she could wonder why it came so fast, her brain processed the information she got. Yes, your address? The person was looking to deliver. But she had asked what about the camera, and got no reply to that. Anyway, she thought it was a dumb question since the description was there in the first place. Your address? The seller insisted. Stacy quickly typed in her address. The minute she typed it in, a knock sounded on her bedroom door. Mom, go away, I'm busy. Mrs. Miller pushed the door open anyway. Darling, I am sorry, She stopped and squinted at words on the laptop. What are you doing? She said, her eyes widening as her brain processed the information she read. I'm ordering something online, Stacy said, standing up to block her mother's view. Craigslist? Her mother whispered, and as she did, her eyes grew dark and anger filled her senses. The reason Stacy had put off buying a camera for weeks was because of her mother. Another thing to annoy Stacy about her mother. Having heard all the things that one could possibly hear about the site, Mrs. Miller had always warned her daughter about Craigslist. The site had many unknown people, buying stuff from just anybody without even seeing their faces. The very thing that got the sweet and nice Mrs. Miller raging like a bull. I told you so many times, Stacy, that this place is dangerous. You can't just give anyone our address. And Craigslist? Are you serious? Stacy! It's my money. I just wanted to get a camera. And you could not get it at the store? Stacy had nothing else to say. Mrs. Miller was only being protective of her daughter. She had heard about this immoral site. It was the reason something in her life went wrong. Her friend and her brother. The people you buy stuff from and don't see their faces or know who they truly are. They could be just anybody. You never know who they could turn out to be in the end. Something her 16-year-old daughter failed to realize. Chapter 4. The Camera. I'm just going to get the camera and he'll be on his way, Dad. At least, I think it's a he. He was going to be a delivery man that was delivering her camera. That was all. He's going to give me something to sign and he's going to hand over to me my camera. Mom doesn't have to be so worried. She doesn't know that not all people are mean. She has to understand that too, sometimes. I love her to death, Dad, but she should also understand that I like to have my space, especially with you. I hate it when she talks about you the way she does. It makes me mad. I don't know why she does that. Walking into the room, her mother began. Stacy, I'm going to the store. I have to get you what you want for tonight. Mrs. Miller smiled at her daughter, the saddest smile Stacy ever saw on her mother's face. Please, darling, stay safe for me and your dad, Mrs. Miller said with a shaky and heavy sigh as she ran her hand through Stacy's hair. After her mother had left, Stacy talked to her dad about what she could do with the camera when it got to the house, and as she described it, a knock sounded on the door. It was here. Stacy rushed to open the door with immense happiness. She had wanted this camera for ages now. She opened the door. The sky was dark and looked like it was about to rain. The winds blew hard and the trees rustled with complaints. She came face to face with a pale woman. Her skin had little bruises on it, and her eyes were sunken pits. Frail, very frail. Her hair was bedraggled, a rat's nest. Stacy, as indifferent as she was towards fashion and how one looks when he or she goes out, thought with horror how someone could come out in public looking this way. Stacy's eyes drifted outside to look behind the woman who continually stared at her. Stacy saw no one in sight. Of course, why would she see anyone? People weren't around at this time of the year. They either travelled to meet family or went on vacation. Stacy could not help but feel weird about this. Why would anyone want to look like this? She looked tortured and starved. Tortured and starved so much that Stacy could still not give in to the thought of everything being all right. Something did not feel right. She looked down at the woman's hands. She remembered. One of these was the same hand holding the camera in the picture she saw on Craigslist. This woman in front of her held out a brown package. The woman stretched out her arms and said in the croakiest voice Stacy had ever heard, "An order for Miss Stacy Miller." The woman looked to be in her late 20s, but Stacy wasn't sure. Her tired eyelids were so drawn down that her eyes could barely be seen through them. They looked like she'd never slept. Her mouth was as drawn as her eyelids, her lower lip revealing a little bit of her lower teeth. That's me," Stacy stammered and reached for the package. But as she took a hold of it, she could not get it out of the other woman's hand. And in the same croaky voice, the woman said with her dead eyes as wide as saucers, "Look inside, please. I beg. Can the car? I beg. The cat won't. Leave it alone. I beg you. Look inside. I want to ride since the bag of carrots." What? Stacy thought. What was she talking about? Stacy could not understand her statement. She felt a jumble of things. She felt stressed, pity, scared. She felt curious. Terror overtook them all. What was this woman trying to say? But before she could ask anything, the woman turned and ran away on her thin and shaky legs while saying with a lot of breath and urgency in her wild eyes, "I've stayed too long. I've stayed too long." Chapter 5. Pictures. Looking at the camera, Stacy admired the structure of the old design of the thing. She still could not forget the look on the strange woman's face as she ran away from her home. It was haunting and scary. What could she be talking about? Stacy thought. Look inside, Stacy recalled out loud. She stared at the camera and she turned it around. Look inside. What could she probably find in a camera? Pictures? But what kind of pictures? She just bought... Wait, she hadn't even paid for the camera. Oh no! How was she going to get the money? I couldn't keep it when I haven't paid for it. But as it happened, Stacy wasn't going to worry about payments for long, because the moment she looked at the camera, all thoughts of money vanished. All that she saw on the old camera were pictures. Pictures of her mother walking in a silent part of town, the rundown part of town where the men had argued. She saw pictures that showed her mother being pulled into a house, the house where the curtains had opened, with no face peering through them. Stacy was filled with horror. So horrified was she that the tears couldn't stop. She screamed at the thought of her mother tied up somewhere, abducted. Her mother was abducted. Stacy, with tears in her eyes, looked at the camera and saw the last picture. It was a note. Come to the edge of town. Let's play. I shouldn't have gone there, Stacy screamed. A certain pain shot across her forehead. It hurt so much that she had to sit down. I shouldn't have gone there. Tears still falling. She had to go there again. She had to. She could not leave her mother. Even if she disliked her mother at times, she loved her mother too much to leave her alone. Don't worry, Dad. I'll get her back. I will find her, Stacy said and walked out the door with the camera in her hand. Alone in the dark room, with her hands bound behind her, Mrs. Miller could not stop thinking about the medicine that had been taken away from her. She got dizzier by the second. Any more thoughts about her daughter all alone at home with no idea that her mother might not come back to see her again worsened matters. She's only 16. She still doesn't know what she's doing. She doesn't understand. She still talks to her father. Her father! She's not crazy. No, my baby! Let me out! She screamed, but nothing was heard. Pin drop silence. It was like no one was there. Or it was like they were all there, with her in the room. She could not know for sure. Stacy ran through the town without stopping to take a breath. The people she passed watched her go, and some even asked questions on what troubled her, but it was like she had gone deaf. She could not hear a thing. She ran to the edge of town and saw them, the houses. Without thinking, she ran into one of them. In it was a big black couch with one woman on it. The couch faced away from the front door where Stacy stood. Stacy grew mad and threw the camera at the back of the couch. It broke into 100 pieces. "Where is my mother?" she yelled, her left eyelid twitching. Her eyes were red with tears, and her hands were sweaty with fear. Who was this woman? So strange, Stacy thought to herself. Even if she could only see the back of her head, Stacy knew this was no ordinary woman. Chapter 6. I'll Say. "You came," the voice of the woman said. It was croaky like the woman that came earlier that day, but there were more hints of femininity in this voice, and more cruelty. "Where is my mother?" Without warning, the woman stood. She was ridiculously tall. Her hair was bone straight and looked wet. It was hard to compare which was thinner in both her arms and waist. She wore a tight black dress and seemed to shake a little bit, like her bones could fall apart any moment. The thin woman turned around, and Stacy saw her face. Stacy's mouth opened wide. She could not believe what she was seeing. The woman had no jaw, and her tongue fell in the space there. Saliva dripped down into her black dress. Her eyes held a dead look to them, like the delivery woman. Suddenly, she screamed at Stacy, who fell back to the floor with fear. Stacy began to tremble. Who were these people, and what were they doing in Hollyfield? Stacy thought. She terribly wanted to get out of there. What creature was this? Her mother was somewhere in the edge of this town. How could she find her? Suddenly, the woman stopped. She shakily walked back to the couch and sat down, mumbling, "When he comes, I'll have my pay." "When who comes?" Stacy's curiosity peaked for that second above her fear. The woman stopped mumbling for a few seconds, but it was only a few before she started again. This time, it was in the crooked and weird way the delivery woman spoke. "See, I'll kill you, mumbler, dirty old coot. He says, she says, I say. Listen, dirty Mr. Do I know, nylons and frogs black, they say. I'll say," the creature muttered. Stacy huddled in one corner of the room. The sharp pain she felt in her head when she was at her home came again. She had to find her mother. "Blast this head and hers. Do not, he says, I will say." The creature scratched her face, and all the way from the couch, blood spilled as close as could be near Stacy. She had to get out of here now. "Where do you think you're going?" the creature yelled with the croakiest voice imaginable. Stacy didn't have time to wonder how the thing had read her mind. As Stacy stood to get out of the house, the creature got up. With lightning speed, its head made a complete turnaround to face her. Stacy almost fainted from fear, but she picked herself up and ran out the door. The creature screamed after her, her thin knees knocking together as hard as they could. Stacy ran into the next house, all her breath gone from her lungs, and slammed the door shut. The voice of the creature gone. Stacy closed her eyes and took huge breaths. She'd made it. Now to find her mother. A grunt could be heard from upstairs. Stacy's eyes were still closed. Somewhere deep in her mind, Stacy wondered if she would see anything when she opened her eyes. Her breath was still labored, and her eyes felt heavy with stress. A tear made its way past her eyelid, the flashing pain making its way across her forehead again. She felt heat all around her. Her hair stuck to her face. She had to do this. But what could be there when she opened her eyes? She opened them, and regretted it instantly. Right in front of her sweaty face were puppet-like faces that grinned and frowned deeply at her, each having different expressions from the others. The room was filled with their dull and haunting colours. They were so close to her she could explain the reason for her laboured breathing. So lifelike were they that she almost fainted from fear. She loved the horrific books she read, but had never wanted it to come this far. Without hesitation, she opened the door and ran off to the house right beside the creepy one she just left. But before she entered, she thought, what would be inside this one? Chapter 7. A Myth. The sky was darker now, and the wind blew harder. It was cold and almost night, and she still hadn't found her mother. She ran into the woods, the pain in her head getting worse by the second. All she had done was accidentally wander into an argument at the end of town. She knew she was supposed to run away and not listen, but she didn't. Her curiosity destroyed her. All she wanted was her camera, something to make her happy when no one else would. Not her mother, not Tristan Pierce, and not even her father. So upset was Stacy Miller that she didn't stop running. Even if the voice of her mother told her to stop, and the voice of her father told her to keep running, she didn't stop to look. She had said it. She hated Hollyfield. There was a reason she did so. She did not stop running when the croakiest voices she had ever heard in her life screamed at her from behind. She saw faces and heard voices that haunted her as the forest let her run deeper into it. Now, people from the neighbouring towns barely visited the ghost town Hollyfield. Whenever it was mentioned, the people remembered the haunting of the poor girl who had a terrible mental problem that deceived her into thinking her dead father was still alive. It all started with an order on Craigslist. The myth says that when anyone went on Craigslist, the mysterious entities from the edge of Hollyfield got to work of pretending to be potential sellers. Then, when one sent an address, the whole story began again. It is said that when any daredevil ventured into the ghost town, that person either left with a remarkable story to tell, or were never seen again. The story would include the sighting of a girl in jeans and soft padded trainers and wet black hair with dead eyes, mumbling something about dead fathers and lost mothers. This has been The Edge of Hollyfield, a short scary story, written by Stories from the Attic, narrated by Robin McConnell. Copyright 2020 by Michael Vandervoort. Production copyright by Michael Vandervoort.